Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
I hear my laptop blowing a lot because
I don't hear.
You don't hear it? Okay.
We don't hear it. No.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, we are ready. Welcome, Catrien Bijleveld. It's really a pleasure to have you in our podcast.
Yeah, it's also a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Catrien Bijleveld. We are really glad that you accepted our invitation. Let me start by asking you the first question we ask everybody in this podcast. How would you define criminology as it exists nowadays in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think that currently criminology is actually really, really rich in the Netherlands.
Welcome, Catrien Bijleveld. It's really a pleasure to have you in our podcast.
Yeah, it's also a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Catrien Bijleveld. We are really glad that you accepted our invitation. Let me start by asking you the first question we ask everybody in this podcast. How would you define criminology as it exists nowadays in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think that currently criminology is actually really, really rich in the Netherlands. We have 3 universities and the National Science Foundation funded institute that conducts a lot of research in criminology. We have a number of researchers at various universities. There are some people in Utrecht, in Maastricht, a few left in Groningen. That's basically it. I hope I'm not insulting somebody, but you know, the sort of the large centers are basically in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Leiden, where lots of research is conducted. We have a Ministry of Justice funded institute, WODC, that does a lot of policy relevant research. And when I say that criminology is rich, what I mean by that is mostly, not only that we have a lot of people who do research, but mostly that it is very rich in a sort of disciplinary, meta-philosophical way, you could say. So, first of all, we have a lot of quantitative and a lot of qualitative criminologists, and both, you know, coexist. I think sometimes there's a little bit of, how would you say that, a fissure or a schism or something between the groups. But I see also a more and more collaboration, which I think is exactly what you need in a discipline like criminology. So that's very good. So that's number one. And number two is that I think also increasingly we see people from various other disciplinary domains collaborating in criminological research. So it used to be very much, you know, sociology dominated. We see a little more psychology. We see some economics. We see anthropology there. So which also strengthens the qualitative kind of research. So I think, you know, if you look at the kind of research that's being done, and that I classify as criminology, I think it has really blossomed over the past 20, 25 years or so.
But what happened there? why this interest in the last 25 years? Which was the situation before?
Yeah, the situation before, I mean, I have to sketch a little bit the history in the Netherlands. By the, I think, mid to late 1990s, in general, it was perceived that criminology was, basically dying in the Netherlands. There were a few people left at a few universities who were, maybe like teaching one course on criminology. A few people were doing research. And then you had that very big institute at the Ministry of Justice that was conducting mostly policy relevant research. So very little theory. Some original people were there and doing good things, but it was basically, subservient to policy questions. So at that point, I think two important things happened that that also are interrelated, and probably the driving force is that the then director of the WODC, although it was not his original idea, Henk van der Bunt, other people had mentioned so before, said we need a strong counterweight to all this policy relevant research in criminology. And that should be funded by the National Science Foundation. So I don't know exactly when NSCR was founded, the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement, which is very bad because I was its director, so I should know, right? It's probably 1997 or something. But anyway, I can repair that in the final one. So then in 1990s, the NSCR was founded, what is now called NSCR, and this was an institute that was co-funded by National Science Foundation and the WODC and Leiden University. So it had three financiers, and basically the very mundane reason why that helped is that there was money. Okay, so it had a good budget. And then really quickly afterwards, and you can doubt whether it is a unique Dutch thing or whether it is a sort of generic thing happening, because it's also the time that the European Society of Criminology was founded. It was decided in the Netherlands that we should start, a regular bachelor's and master's program in criminology. We didn't have it until then. That was only at the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University. We had, you could do a number of extra courses if you did law, only in the master's, and then you could sort of call yourself a criminologist. So people from Leiden, the VU, Vrije Universiteit, Free University, and Rotterdam, then sort of, put their hands together, as we say in Dutch, and they decided, okay, well, we're gonna start this program. So we then had NSCR. It very quickly had a new director, Gerben Bruinsma. Henk van der Bunt was both at Free University and in Rotterdam. So those were basically, I think, two very big players. And yeah, we got enthusiastic staff together, and we basically designed one program, same program for all three universities, and all the teachers, of which I was one. I was the one for research methodology. We were sort of, we were like a traveling circus, as we said. So we traveled around, etc. And we were very insecure in the beginning whether this would fly. We said, oh, we're going to be very happy if we have 50 students for the first year. But it went really well. So we had a lot of students signing up, and after a while we also found that they actually found jobs. And then, with student numbers comes also funding for research. So that was a sort of additional impulse, where you also had like assistant professors, associate professors, full-time professors, also doing research, not only at NSCR, but also at these different universities. So, and of course, it's not completely separate, because a number of people who work at NSCR, they're professors in Rotterdam or in Leiden or at the Free University. And the Institute NSCR midway, they even in 2009 they moved to the Free University. So that institute basically, I mean, it's there for all Dutch criminology. But I think those were two reasons why it sort of blossomed so much. And so very, very bluntly speaking, because there was money, but also because, you know, in the sphere, you could say, or in the sort of, you know, vision of NSCR, it was a discipline-free kind of enterprise, you know. So we had mathematicians, we had historians, we had sociologists, we had anthropologists, you know, all these people, you know, actually studying this object of crime.
Okay.
At the same time, this is quite a particular. It's quite particular. This combination that you have researchers at the NSCR part-time who are also part-time professors. Because for example, in France they have let's say the French Science Foundation, and people are researchers for them. In Switzerland, you have the Swiss National Science Foundation, but they don't employ people. They just give funds for the research. But you have this mix of people doing research and also teaching at the universities. That came like that, or was something planned?
Yeah. I think one of the fears when establishing the NSCR was that it would become like an island, you know, well-funded, building beautiful data sets and only enjoying it themselves. So a sort of core philosophy of the NSCR, we are the Dutch Institute. I still work at NSCR. One of the core elements of its philosophy was also that, you know, everybody should enjoy, for instance, the data that we have here, you know, that people, I mean, you cannot just take the data from our website because they're too sensitive, but anybody who sort of writes an email and says, I want to use your data for study X or something, unless one of our PhDs is working on that at a slower pace, you know, in principle, everybody can use those data. So, and if you want to establish that, you have to make sure that there are interconnections. It doesn't work to just put it on your website. You actually need to have the people, you know, who sort of sit together, who meet each other at the coffee machine and say, oh, but I have data on this, or oh, that's a great idea. Let us collaborate. So if you actually, you know, want to make sure that, you know, the whole scientific criminological community benefits from the funds that go into such a national institute, you have to ensure that you have a sort of carpet woven, or you have to have threads everywhere, you know, so that people know what's going on, find each other. And it also, you know, benefits interdisciplinary collaboration, because we do not only have professors at criminological institutes, but also at sociology or, you know, other psychology, other departments. So the idea is that by this you also foster the interdisciplinary exchange.
At the same time, you mentioned PhD students, so they're affiliated both to the NSCR and to universities.
Well, they have to be, because NSCR is simply a research institute. So it is impossible for us, you know, what, even though some people are professor here, you know, we cannot give out a PhD degree, you know, so we have to be connected to universities. And here the idea is also, you know, that various, definitely faculties have, for instance, we have obviously geographically the strongest link with Free University right now. But we have the Department of Biological Psychology that now also has a PhD student, you know, collaborating with us, looking at, you know, using genetic designs to investigate the impact of victimization, you know. So it is I think it is it has been and still is hugely important, not in the sense that NSCR is sort of, I mean, NSCR is big, just only already because of its I think this whole idea of, you know, exchange and collaborating with people from other disciplines, I think it's very much a national thing, that is now embodied in the NSCR, but I think you would also see it, I mean, if you would go to the department in Leiden or in Rotterdam, you'd see the same variety of backgrounds that people have. Yeah, so it's really a national thing. And of course, so as we educate, I mean, when we started, we didn't have criminologists because we didn't have criminology. Right? And of course, now we have criminology. So now the first people who graduated in criminology are actually becoming professors, full professors. So in the beginning, it was in a sense necessary to pluck people from other disciplines, like from law, from sociology, because we didn't have criminologists, but now we have them. So, but I think even so, I think people value interdisciplinary research, and I think interdisciplinary research is also more fun. So,
yeah, but there is also a particularity there of the Netherlands. You mentioned the WODC, which is an institute that depends from the Ministry of Justice. For those who do not know it, it is much less prominent nowadays. It's a completely different profile, but it was omnipresent in the 80s, I would say, yeah, because Josie Jungertas was there, Jan van Dijk. What happened? And you have a victimization survey since the 70s, if I'm correct. So what happened there? Why this interest in crime, let's say?
What do you mean? What happened in the sense that it became less prominent?
Well, there are two things. One is why the WDC became this prominent. That is one question. The other one is why it became such a major issue, crime in the Netherlands, in the 70s and 80s, to have a specific ministry working, devising policies, creating a victim survey, which is really an exception in Europe, apart from the UK and some surveys in the Nordic countries.
Yeah. I think WODC was established in 73. Could that be? I don't know. Somewhere.
I think, yeah, those are the years, yeah.
Yeah. So you might have to correct me on that in the final edit, but I can't really answer that. Jan van Dijk would have to answer that, because I was still in secondary school then, and I'm not a criminologist. I'm just a research methodology with a lawyer.
Yeah, but that's why I ask you, because you can give us a different. We discussed this with Jan van Dijk, but I want to have a second opinion.
I can answer the question about why the WODC has become less important. I think number one, I mean, they had a little bit of a how do you say that? They had a little bit of a monopoly, you could say, because they were basically the only one. And the moment that you establish another institute, and then programs are being funded and are growing, etc., it's only natural that you become one of the players in the field. But I think also that somehow the WODC has become more sort of professionalized, more mechanized, more, in a way it's good, because they do a lot of ex ante and also process evaluation and other evaluations of laws, of lots of laws. They do all that, and also after, questions that are asked in our parliament, they do all these things. And they do that in a very professional and sort of systematized way. But somehow, the WODC, like in the early 90s, used to be a little bit revolutionary, thinking out new things, being a little bit rebellious. And it has become a little bit more subdued, you could say, mechanized. Some of the blood has gone out of it, maybe. I mean, that's how I perceive it. Which is not to say that they're still very useful, but they're definitely not the cheerleaders anymore, as I perceive it.
Because I think in general in Europe, the times of these leaders doing research, sometimes against the government. We had this discussion with people from the Home Office. They were against the use of imprisonment in the at the time of Tony Blair, and this is
Yeah.
much less common. People don't want complications, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It may very well be there's nothing to do with the WODC, because also our Dutch Ministry of Justice, for a long time, they had like a sort of a central strategy department, you know, and those would be people, you know, who would also, you know, offer some kind of counter thinking and some alternative views. And they just did away with that, you know. We don't want to have that fuss, you know. So, I mean, it may be a sort of generic thing that this is what we want in the ministry, you know. We want people, you know, obeying orders, and that's it.
Yeah, my opinion is that the big difference is that when you work for governmental organizations, it is not really theory driven, and I think there the NSCR has played a major role in stimulating, together with all the universities in which criminology is taught, to do research from a more theoretical framework and to explicitly test theories. But that didn't go overnight. Can you say something more about how that developed slowly?
Yeah, and I think it happened in a very gradual way, because the first years that the NSCR was established and also that all these programs started, a lot of research that we did was very descriptive. And like, for instance, we didn't know how long an average criminal career lasted in the Netherlands. I mean, David Farrington had done that for the UK, but we hadn't done that. We didn't know where good data sources were. We didn't know what the use was of what do you call that, dossiers from criminal law cases. We didn't. I mean, we discovered that, you know, you could link databases. And of course, it's also, you know, the times. You know, it is the times when also our Central Statistics Office started building systems where a lot of administrative information about our citizens is, you know, in separate files, like on healthcare use and on schooling and on the taxes and whatever, but that you can link, you know. So it is a time of, you know, getting the descriptives out at first, finding, you know, where data are to be had, something that for empirical legal studies, for instance, that's something we still need to find out. We don't know what is in, you know, private law files. We don't know how quickly they are cleaned. You know, all these things you have to know, you know, what police data are worth, stuff like that. So it was really, in the first years, it was a time of, you know, discovery. And it was also a time where a lot was possible. For instance, we, for a long time here at NSCR, we had all the police data. We used them under strict rules, right? But we had them. And, you know, we would go to the Criminal Records Office in Almelo Way in the east of the Netherlands, you know, and they would let us, you know, tap into the system and see what proportions of sex offenders recidivated. You know, all these things were possible. So it was it was maybe the time of the big explorations or something, something that you also had in the world when people traveled to Africa, etc., and were like empty spots. So those empty spots were filled. And the moment that we sort of did that and got that, been there, done that, I think that's when actually, you know, theoretical development, some people were already busy on it sooner, of course, because you have like a theoretical guideline on what you want to know. But I think the sort of explanation of the patterns that we first described, you know, started after that phase. And if I may immediately follow up on that, Marcelo, what is also a trend that I see now is that sort of first phase where we could, you know, explore data. We would go to the Central Prosecutor's Office, you know, we would always bring a big box of chocolates because that helps. But then we would work in the system. And of course, we signed confidentiality forms, etc. I don't think ever anything went wrong. But these days, this is increasingly impossible. This is decreasingly possible. And so we encounter more and more obstacles in the gathering of data. And this is all subsumed on the GDPR. Yeah, privacy this, privacy that, which was never breached, which you can easily organize. But I think there's something else under it that is actually driving this difficulty of access to data, and that is, fear of scandal. We don't want to have fuss. We don't want to have people looking at our fingers, seeing what we're doing. So, and maybe I'm moving a little bit too fast. I'm trying to put pauses in between, so that you can easily edit it. This sort of optimistic sort of period of development and sort of discovery, and sort of, actually, how do you say that, really sort of substantive empirical strengthening of criminology that we had in the first years is, I think, currently actually under threat, because it is more and more difficult to get government data, which are there because there's lots of institutions that gather information on crime. There, but the doors are increasingly closed, and sometimes they don't even close them, but they say, okay, we have a committee that's going to work on this, and you'll hear from them. And the worst thing that I encountered is where it took a committee 2.5 years to say that we couldn't get access to data. So, it basically frustrates the effort. And that means that we have to resort more to interviewing people, which is also increasingly more difficult because response rates have been going down. And that means that for the Netherlands, more and more people are now looking at Central Statistics Office data, because there's a lot of data that you can combine. And then you have data on the entire Dutch population. You don't bother people with interviews. You have a 100% response rate. It's all perfect. But of course, everything you see in such data is the outside part of people's lives. So in a sense, it is a impoverishment, you could say, of the data. You get beautiful data, you get big data, but it is a pancake of data. It's very flat, it is shallow. So this whole thing of keeping researchers out of the door, not having them look in criminal files. We also have much more problem with ethics committees who say, oh, you cannot interview victims because we think they are too vulnerable to do that. So that means that we, I think, see perhaps less and less well what's going on. So it bites itself in the tail, I think.
Yeah, it's a general problem. I fully agree with that. And
probably it's not uniquely Dutch, but
because these people, they say we think that it is like that.
Yeah.
We think, and this is a authority argument, It is like that. Don't touch them. I don't know what is going on.
Yeah. Well, we're of course not passive victims of this, so we're trying to stand up against it, and we're trying to also, get victims along, like saying, well, please, can you listen to us? Our voices, we can decide whether we're vulnerable or not. And of course it is an issue, you have to take care of it. But that has happened for years and years in research. Things haven't changed all of a sudden. So, I think declining response rates, government institutions that keep the door closed for access to data, has really change the sort of environment in which we conduct research.
It must have, or it must affect, the kind of PhDs you want to do, because a PhD normally takes 4 years, and as a researcher, if you have to wait 2 years to obtain your data, then you're kind of like restricted to choose some topics, and you cannot study everything anymore. So that's really a restriction of academic freedom, I think.
No, it is definitely, and I've now encountered this 3 times, where actually, permission that, objectively speaking, I think, There would have been no argument not to have us have a look in the file. We always offer control, where we say, well, you can look at the article before we submit it to see whether any privacy, has been breached. So, but that's really an issue. But on the other hand, maybe I'm complaining too much, because these CBS data, these central statistics data, have become incredibly rich. There's a lot there. There's a lot of things there that you could never ask people. You cannot ask. If you would ask me exactly when did you work where, I can sort of roughly reconstruct it, but not exactly. But central statistics, they know exactly how much money I earned, etc., etc. If you ask people about how much medicine they used, all that is registered there. So we also had more possibilities to test things that we could never test before. And of course, there's we've had a massive improvement in sort of the microsociology of violence. Marie Lindegaard is an example of that, where she uses CCTV data to analyze incidents, where actually, and I think that's a sort of major shift in our research opportunities, because until we use these CCTV data, we would always ask about criminal events retrospectively. And we would always get subjective evaluations of what happened. Like, you were there and what did you think, etc., etc. And, if you use the CCTV data, of course, you have to use special methods that they use, for research with primates, because you don't hear anything. So you have to interpret from the movements what's happening. But, you are there, you see the event happening, and you see also that major theories, have been subverted, like the one on the bystander effect. So research has shown that people actually do intervene. So it has also been theoretically very important. And another thing, after all my wailing about not getting good access to data, another major development is virtual reality. And a lot of research started here at NSCR with Jean-Louis van Gelder, who is now at Max Planck. But that, of course, gives also massive opportunities to conduct research.
Yeah, and before we move from this subject, you mentioned the ethics committees. I would like to have your opinion on this. I will tell you openly what I think, because then I have the impression that the key is who is in these committees. And I have the impression that people who are very actively engaged in research don't want to be in these committees, because these are boring committees. You have to stay there, go to meetings, and they want to do research. And so you don't get the most active research in the ethics committees. And I have the impression that they are biased. What do you think?
Yeah, my own experience is a little bit mixed. For one, I was the one that established the ethics committee here, so I said we should have one. But I think you have to have an ethics committee. It's very simple, and more, grant providers, they ask after this. And also, if you want to have government data, in the past they never asked this, but now they always ask this. Like, did an ethics committee give approval or say that the design was okay? My own experiences with our committee here have been a little bit mixed. I think here, I don't know about all the committees, but yeah, for sure they're bureaucratic, but they have to be, that's their role. Sometimes they have been overly bureaucratic, like the examples that I gave. Well, we believe that victims are too vulnerable to be interviewed. I think that's really, really overstepping it. But on the other hand, you have to give them a lot of information when you submit your application, like also the questionnaire. They want to see everything. And at some points I had them, look at the design of my study, and they really identified flaws, that I was like, oops, I never thought about that. So, overall, I consider them helpful, although they can be a little bit syrupy, as we say in Dutch. You understand what I say, Lieven. So it's like sort of, it's a sort of slow trudging, before you're there. But I mean, we cannot do without them anymore.
No, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, but with regard to survey research, it's really problematic because the response rates are really decreasing. So the traditional kinds of research, I mean, really have huge challenges. So I think maybe it's an opportunity to find new ways of conducting data. For example, the virtual reality and CCTV, as you mentioned. Although I can also imagine that people are reluctant to share these kind of data because of other reasons of privacy.
Yeah, and I sometimes also think that we're taking things too seriously. Like, for instance, whenever I think maybe I should ask permission, I do it. Just have done it. And then, for instance, when you do a vignette study, and it is a case about, like we do a case about, what is it, some kind of international crime in a village, and etc., etc. And then the committee says, oh, we think this is a very shocking case. And then I think, yeah, but this is what you read every day in the newspaper. Come on. So, but what was your question again? I forget it. You said, we have to resort to other modes of data collection. Oh, yeah, and the second thing I want to say, also, I think sometimes it's a little bit overrated or something, in the sense that, we also sometimes conducted research where we had, young school going, this is like sort of vocational training people, so like 18 to 19 years old. And we had them fill out forms, and then we said, oh, it is all very well protected, and we cannot, we were also asking about really sensitive things like, sexual crimes and things. And it went like, oh, we don't care, we'll just fill it out, ha. So, they really had no problem with it. So, it is maybe a bit overprotective.
Yeah, and there is another thing that I find interesting in the Netherlands. And so you mentioned this growth of criminology in the 1990s. It starts in the 1990s, which coincides with the period of decreasing offline crime rates. I mean, property crime is going down, homicide is going down, violence we could discuss. So at the moment when it becomes less important, you have the growth of criminology in the universities. And sometimes, as we have been with this trend, of course, of online crime is increasing, but we were not measuring in the right way. We tend to forget how things were 50 years ago. So when we were discussing with Jan van Dijk, he said that many of the places that nowadays are main attractions for tourists were a little bit dangerous places in the 70s and 80s. And this is true also in New York. You can see it. I mean, you watch Bananas from Woody Allen in 1973. The metro was really a dark place. And so perhaps, I think we forgot. He said also, I don't know if he said it, I don't remember if he said it in the interview, but he told me many times that when he started studying crime was always going up. And so they needed to do things. So maybe we tend to forget how the 70s and the 80s were. And the question, I have a couple of questions there. Why the Netherlands took it so seriously? But this is probably, we will not know it. Maybe was it worse than in other places? But you took it seriously. You started measuring. You got data. And then also you could see when it started going down. In many other countries, they didn't see it. Only you see that most of the research on the crime drop was the Netherlands, UK, and United States, because you have indicators for the whole period. And I have the impression, and then this is my last point, that when we started trying to explain the crime drop, we underestimated the role that effective criminal policies played. Because Jan van Dijk told me we were very successful. What do you think about that? I
am not so convinced about the success of policies. I don't know. It's weird to be a criminologist, and I'm not even a real criminologist, but it is weird to study something that you cannot measure well, where you cannot do experiments, where and things that have what is the word? There are very sort of slow processes that take place. So I would probably not dare to say that we were very successful in reducing crime. I wouldn't, I mean, I sort of recognize that some areas that were extremely dangerous a number of years back are now perfectly safe to go to. But on the other hand, you know, drug crime, trading has increased massively. Online crime, we can measure even worse than offline crime. So I think, you know, to a large extent, it's not that we know nothing, but and it's not that we're the only field that has, you know, difficulty with measuring its dependent variable. The same goes for traffic research, traffic safety research. But I wouldn't dare to say full mouth yes to that. It's a very political answer.
No, but it's a good. No, that is why I told you we want different voices.
Yeah,
because
yeah, I don't know that. And it is also, you know, I came late onto the scene. I came onto the scene in like 1999 or so.
And what were you doing before that?
I was a research methodologist. I was working at the university. And then I switched jobs and I went to the WODC. And then I thought, well, let me do a few law courses. And then I graduated in law. And then I went to Gerben and I said, Gerben, if you ever need a research methodologist, you know, I'm walking around here. And he said, well, I need you now. So I said, okay. So that's how it went.
That's the origin of your book on methodology.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
And I was not this sort of hardcore, you know, methodologist that only does research on methodologies, because, you know, I like applied research much more. It's more fun. You know, I did research in a lot of areas, you know, psychology, in biology, in history, and you know, as long as you have nice data, especially if they're longitudinal, you know, I mean, it's fun. You can work with them. It's nice because you get to know about new areas. But you know, I also was never trained in criminology. You know, I'm not, you know, very theoretical like Lieven is, or you, Marcelo.
No, but and one interesting thing also about criminal policy is that you are now part of an institution in the Netherlands whose name I will not be able to pronounce, that helps the government evaluating criminal policies. Okay, could you develop a little bit on that?
Well, basically what we're doing is, of course, we do evaluative research. We do evaluative research. And mostly also because, you know, sometimes the WODC, you know, puts out a call and you can apply for a grant to do research on X or Y or Z. So we do that. But we also have a big group of people who do research on evidence-based policing. So that is really, I mean, maybe not governmental policy, but definitely, you know, looking at the evidence base of, you know, what you do to combat crime, to help victims, etc., etc. So, so we try to do that, and I think that nobody is doing that well enough, because I think if you want your findings to be picked up by policymakers and used, you should go and bring them there, and you should translate them for the people, which we don't do enough, because writing an article in Dutch is not enough. You know, they won't read it. So you really have to actively, you know, go pound them in their faces, you know, tell them what they could do. But it's a difficult line, because, I mean, you're not the policymaker. So some people say, yeah, we really don't know what you're doing, and you should come and bring more. And other policymakers tell us, like, we know enough, you know, but we should now get going and use your data. And of course, there's a lot of, you know, crime is always a sensitive issue. So there's a lot of, politicking going on. You know, like I remember one time that we showed empirically, if previous sex offenders are employed, that they reoffend less. Period. Okay. And then our State Secretary of Justice says, well, even though we know this, it might give some people a bad, we call this an underbelly feeling. If these previous sex offenders are allowed onto some jobs, so we will withhold them from these previous sex offenders. So sometimes you show that a policy is counterproductive, that you actually make society more dangerous by doing it that way, and still the political choice is made to make a difference. So I think this is very particular to the field that we're studying, that there's this sensitivity, and maybe it is predominantly with sex offenders. I don't know. I study a lot of sex offending, but definitely. So I think in the area of pickup of our findings in policy making, I think still more can be done by ourselves, but probably also partly by policymakers themselves, because some of them really, really know what's out there. But there's probably also sort of some political constraints to what can be done.
I know regarding the empirical evaluation of policy, I mean, this is of course where methodologists also play an important role. I have the impression that in some countries, key institutions like the police are not really keen on their work being evaluated. How do you tackle this?
Yeah, how do you tackle this? I don't have good examples, but of course the Americans do this very well, because they simply calculate the costs.
Mm-hmm.
They say it's just going to cost you if you don't do it this way, and it's going to cost you less if you do it the other way. I think that here and there we've had some major shifts in the sense that people at important positions within ministries have said, okay, we have to do something, which is one reason. I'm sorry I'm talking so much about NSCR, but which is one reason why we have the big police program here at NSCR. So there's $1 million a year that's being invested. Oh no, you should cut that out. Sorry. There's a lot of money put into research on evidence-based policing, trying to make policing more evidence-based, and I think that is illustrative of definitely the policymakers, the people in the ministry at central positions who agreed to this, of a more open mind to this. But what we explicitly did, and which I think is vital for anything to be successful, we do that research with the police.
Yeah.
So they have to become the owners. And it is, I think, a psychological thing to a certain extent, but it's also about, them to understand what we are doing, and us to understand how to actually design the study in such a way that it can become useful. Because we're sitting here behind desk, they're out there in the field, and so I think the collaboration is hugely important.
So this institution plays a role in evaluating policies, but also counseling the policymakers. Is that correct? And if so, how this information gets to the policymakers?
Yeah,
arrives to them.
I don't know whether we have a regular mechanism for that, but sometimes that, like departments, they will invite us over to talk about specific issues. Like, for instance, I know of one invitation to talk about reducing drug use. And we had also like more generic ones on victim aid, victim support, things like that. So I do not think we have like a specific structure for that, although what I think almost every department of criminology, and also we at NSCR do, is that we have like, a group of societally important people, that you talk with once or twice a year. You talk about your research. They are informed about what we do. They ask us questions, so that we sort of feel the kind of issues that are going around and are deemed important. But this is a very, how do you say that, light-footed way of doing it. Yeah, I think it is not more officially structured than that, actually.
Yeah, I was thinking we were together at the Council of Europe, that the model of the Council of Europe is quite interesting because you have all these committees working, meeting, bringing experts, and then they go to the Council of Ministers, and all the recommendations are based on this work. And I think that is quite useful because the other two models, I'm on scientific leave this semester doing research in Argentina. So someone knew I was here. They invited me to the Congress to make a presentation during the debates on a law against organized crime. So I went there, I talked 12 minutes. This is recorded, but I don't think it will have any impact. If I compare to Switzerland, they have these commissions that work a little bit like the Council of Europe. And then all the works are there, and you can go, they are online now, and you can see that the Handbook of Criminology of Martin Kilias is quoted there. So it's quite, these are two completely different systems. I was advocating for evaluating research. What I get from this discussion is you need an institution there doing the evaluation. But how to reach the policymakers? In the Netherlands, we're going to go probably through a period of changes in laws. How this information gets to the policymakers?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, sometimes we sort of jokingly say, but I think that's not polite. You have to sort of force it down their throat. I don't think it's polite, so maybe you shouldn't quote that. But you
forget political correctness. Be yourself here.
Yeah, no. But I mean, how does it get to them? You have to bring it. You have to bring it. You have to send it to them. You have to send them updates. You have to have, like, for instance, on certain topics, we have yearly conferences and we explicitly invite them. And they're not just scientific conferences, but we have, like, you organize in such a way that you have someone presenting a research and the policymaker responding to it. Because it is not just us sending, it is also us receiving that is important.
So now you are referring to the NVK,
No.
Okay.
No, I'm referring, like, for instance, at NSCR we have a victim program. We do a lot of research on victims. And so we have, like, a yearly conference on research on victims.
Okay.
Yeah, and you invite victim support groups, victim aid, you invite the victim fund, you invite the ministry. There's a lot of victims who come. Really interesting because they're also organized, and those are also important, So so that's, and you make it a little bit razzle-dazzle. You make sure it's in The Hague, because otherwise they have to travel too fast. So you have to make it easy and accessible, and you design it in such a way that it's not just lecturing the whole day, but is actually giving and receiving. So, but I mean, I think it's a perennial problem.
Yeah, I
always
agree.
Been there, and we're probably not going to solve it very well. But yeah.
Yeah, in Belgium we tried something similar with the Dutch Society for with the Flemish Society for Criminology, and in the first edition we tried to invite policymakers, keep it low profile, but they just don't like the academic style of having presentations, even when it's about their own institutions or results that really are important for them. It's difficult to create these synergies. Yeah.
Well, sometimes we say jokingly to each other, like, okay, you have to. I mean, if they really don't listen, you have to make sure that you get a piece in the newspapers, and then they'll listen. Because they cannot avoid it then. So if you really think you have to make your point, maybe that's the way to go. But But it's perennial, and it's important because we're doing all this research with tax money, right?
Exactly.
I'm getting more and more convinced that in the end it's a matter of persons. You need to find a deputy or a senator, and she or he should be interested.
No, and it's also we're always so careful, huh? So when they were celebrating that WOTC existed 50 years or so, we had two what we call DG's, so director generals, so people at the head of important departments of Ministry of Justice, and both of them said, tell us a little bit more concretely what we should do. And of course we're always very hesitant about that because we're so nuanced, and we don't know for sure, and there's always a margin of uncertainty and blah blah blah, and we've been sort of trained to do that way. But if you really want them to pick it up, maybe you shouldn't tell them what to do, but give them a number of options or something. There's sort of a way, but I think this requires continuous effort and will probably still do for the coming years, also after I have been pensioned.
Now, and a lot of the things that you mentioned about the research would go under the label of problem-solving criminology. Mm-hmm. So you're doing empirical research, solving things, but the Netherlands also have a tradition which is less seen now of, let's say, critical criminology, which used to be quite important. And sometimes I have the impression that they go by a different highway, like there is not a lot of contact, but maybe I'm wrong because I'm outside the Netherlands.
Yeah, it could be. It could very well be. And also this has changed a lot. So like 25 years back or even 30 years back, whenever like a new governmental document would appear, about a certain crime issue, the Dutch Journal of Criminology would jump on it, and it would be filled with contribution, with people, commenting on this new document, etc. That has essentially disappeared. So this sort of idea like, we're following them, the government, which is, of course, very much, I think maybe a remnant of the 70s or the 60s even, that has disappeared. And we do have, more sort of critical people. But yeah, I think they mostly, they and the more empirical people move in slightly different spheres, I think. Yeah.
Then one thing, because you told us that you have to leave in 20 minutes, so we still have time. We never want to push and try to be quiet. But one thing that I prefer to ask you now, before because you have time. This is a question that we ask all our guests, which is how crime has changed during your lifetime.
Yeah.
That's the question.
It's a very difficult one. And I really don't have the data there. I think we saw a pretty massive increase from the 60s onwards, and that's when we started. In the 70s, we started the victim surveys. Maybe the best answer to this is to say that I think two things are clear. The clearest is the shift from offline to online crime. That is, I mean, not very well documented, but it's really the only explanation that we have, and it's very obvious for the drop in sort of street crime that we see. And the other one is we have very much changing sensitivity to certain crimes. So sensitivity to violence, to sexual crimes. In sexual crimes, you see it the most. And maybe a third change is that has to do maybe with emancipation of women or individualization, that domestic violence is a public worry and not a private one. So I think those changes are easier to ascertain than changes in crime, because we have I mean, the best data we have are probably the victim surveys, right? But even they are not flawless. So I don't know. You shouldn't ask me this. I'm the research methodologist, but you shouldn't be asking me this. I don't know. I think the issue about the changing sensitivities and yeah, and maybe the fourth one. So let me phrase it in a neat way. So I think there's four things. No, I think there's a number of things that we are pretty certain of. And the first one is probably the shift from offline to online crime, that we're also not certain of because we can't measure online crime very well, but it's the only likely and quite probable explanation. Second one is that we have become more sensitive to certain crimes, sexual crimes. You see changes also in, what we consider punishable and what not. A third one is that we understand now that private violence is a public worry, should be a public worry. So that has to do with the fact that we consider domestic violence an issue for the police. And in the past they would say, well, you solve it yourselves, but now that's really different. And the same goes that, now rape within marriage exists, didn't exist beforehand. And the last one, I think that we pretty much agree, is that hard drugs have become more and more of an issue in the Netherlands. So that's the chunk of speaking that you can cut out from this tape.
No, it's a very, very good explanation. Also, discussing with Uberto Gatti, but he didn't mention it in the interview for the podcast. He told me that when he started going to visit prisons in the late 60s, early 70s, the typical prisoner inmate was a poor guy from southern Italy who was there in northern Italy. And that changed completely the composition of the prison population. And I think the Dutch case is interesting because you also reduced the prison population, which other countries did not. Do you have any idea perhaps you didn't think about that. I'm sure you thought about that, but maybe you can share.
It's very hard to attribute, in a sort of hard empirical way, changes that you see to one factor or the other. What we have now is what we call, what do you call them? Community sanctions that were introduced, and why exactly were they introduced? Peter van der Laan would be better placed to sort of discuss that. But looking at what's happening currently, I think that the extent to which we're currently able to execute sanctions also, or is heavily influenced by possibly the demographic decline that we have everywhere in Europe and also in the Netherlands. So we cannot find enough people. We do have enough cells, that's not the issue, but we do not have enough people to guard the inmates. So that's not new, because we had a similar issue I think in the late 80s or early 90s. But that's a period when we didn't have enough cells. So then quickly a lot of prisons were built. It was under Minister Zorgdrager. He was the Minister of Prisons, laughingly. But currently, the issue is not the number of cells, but it's the number of wardens that we can't get. And this may, all these shortages that we have, and we do not have them only, in the prison system. We also have them at the prosecution department. We have them in the courts. And they may not all be due to the demographic decline, but it's a thing that you hear everywhere. So that may also be a factor that impacts the manner in which we sanction people.
Okay, that was perfect, very clear too. And what, in your opinion, which are the current challenges for criminologists or regarding crime in the Netherlands in the second decade of the 21st century?
For the Netherlands, I think currently online crime, and that's a very broad range. It's just regular crime that typically goes online, like what we call marktplaatsfraude. So that's, not, you ask people to send you something and you don't pay. Or people pay something and they don't get it. So that's typical, or old-fashioned crime, but it now has like an online jacket that it wears. But there's also other forms like, sort of sexting or sextortion. That we cannot, not only we cannot measure it well, but we don't understand the consequences very well. And so for some people it is even more damaging than, we always thought that, if somebody touches your body, I mean, your physical body, your integrity, that's the thing that really, really hurts. Not only physical, but, that's the thing that really matters. But for some people, the consequences may be much more disastrous than if it were, a physical thing happening to them. So that's number one. And number two, I think, is drugs. We're really struggling with that currently. It gives a lot of pollution. It gives danger. We had a number of cases. We had one, how do you call them, group of criminals trading cocaine. We had a number of murders of a journalist, of a lawyer, and someone else. I forget, but that's very bad. So cut this out. So we had a number of murders, likely by this group, that gravely shocked society, and that also, corrodes is the English word, and that also corrodes the fundaments of our society. Because, for instance, in one of the court cases against the assumed perpetrators, the suspects, the defendants, many witnesses did not want to give their name. So that results, in a kind of ghost court case, where also lawyers were rightfully complaining, the sort of lawyers of the defendants complaining, like, we cannot check what's going on. But people were so afraid. So, it sort of corrodes society from the inside, what's happening. So that's something that people are very, very much worried about, and we don't know what to do about it. And I understand that in Switzerland you can buy weed in the Lidl. Huh? Did you know this?
Yeah, well, it's because there is CBD, which is without any problem. This changed completely. It's funny because the Netherlands were always seen as the leading the way in drugs. I think
now we have this kind of weed experiment where we're trying to, sort of regulate the production of cannabinoids. I don't know what you call them in English. So, but that's moving. It's a snail's pace, and. And we have, like, for instance, the mayor of Amsterdam says we should legalize everything, and the mayor of Rotterdam is doing a campaign telling users of cocaine that you have blood on your hands, So he's addressing the users, like you're responsible for what you're doing. So and our current Minister of Justice, is for the sort of hardline approach, mafia style, anti-mafia style. So I don't know where it's going to end.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point. These gangs. Sweden is also having a lot of problems, but also perhaps we should take the advantage of having you here to talk a little bit, at least at one point, going a little bit to Europe, from the Netherlands to Europe, because we have a battle there together with them. The need for a European victimization survey, and perhaps it's a good place to leave your testimony here about that.
Yeah, well, I think, you're doing this interview from the European Society of Criminology, and I think that we are underutilizing the possibilities that we would have to compare data. to test theories, comparing data from different countries. And because, the policies, the laws, the practices are different in the various European countries, but if we would have one crime measure, we would be able to actually test those things. We would benefit from being, a group of European countries with having all this variety. But because we don't have European data, which is actually really, really silly. Of course, we have the course book, but it will not give us the prevalence data. We know what happens in the systems, and you do this really in a great way, and you should definitely continue it, even though you get very little money for it, but continue it. But we need to have European data on crime. It's it's unimaginable that we don't have it. It's going to cost barely, something that still people are worried a lot about. People worry now much more about climate change, about war. It's all understandable, but crime is still high on the list for many citizens in Europe. And it is, you can't explain to Americans that we don't have these data. Yep. It's really, really strange. So that is, I think, something that, we should, I've been trying to work towards it. It's not going to be easy because you have all these bureaucratic, if you want to have a little bit of money, it's always hard to get, right? And if you want to have a lot of money, it's easier. But, so anyway, but, I'm being recorded, but you can cut it out. But Jan and I think we're going to say to each other, we're going to ask the European Society to actually do something to get it started, because it's just, this Council of Europe is not going to work.
No. With Jan, we started in 2009. We started that project for Eurostat, and the survey was ready. But of course, we underestimated. We included questions on online crime because it was already an issue, but the way of measuring could have been better. But of course, if the survey was there, we would have been improving it. Because, for example, the Finns now, they know that people are more afraid of being victims of online crime. 50% were. I know,
of course they are, and rightly so. It's very scary. Yeah, because you don't know who these people are. It doesn't help to go to the police. You can lose a lot of money. It's very scary.
Yeah. I think also there is a slight change in the profiles of the researchers, the multiplication of actors, in the field. In the 1990s, you could say Dutch criminology, you could mention 3 persons, Swiss criminology, 2 persons. And then these people would get together and do something. Now there is a multiplication of researchers. And I have the impression that there are less generalists. People get very specific. They do research on one topic, and they are not necessarily interested in comparative research. Because if you make your work, you have your survey or...
But it's also because there's no data, So you can do the sort of functioning of the criminal justice system. You can do that using the source book. But the nice thing would be, of course, to see how crime levels are different and why that could be, etc., etc.
Yeah, but all these projects continue because you have a very small group of persons who are pushing them every year without getting any financial compensation for that. And this is getting more and more difficult to find people that want to do that. Also, I think the way in which the European Union finances research, something that is going on, they cannot fund because they wanted at one moment to support the Council of Europe annual penal statistics, which is something concrete. I remember Kaukaroma saying Eurostat, there you have something concrete. And they couldn't do it because it's an ongoing thing. So you need new things for 3 years. So people get together to get the money from the European Union. They do the research in 3 years. They give the final report and they jump to another project. And this is a little bit stupid, and it's public money. It should be there should be a different way of dealing with that. But I was unable. I discussed with several people that were in Brussels. And by Brussels, I mean the European Union headquarters, but they are there for 3 or 4 years. The moment they understand how crime works, the moment you get them to understand, they leave,
Yep. I prepared, you also wanted to ask me about crime journals in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Should I still?
That is a nice topic. Yeah,
Yeah.
please
Because
go.
that's the part that I prepared very well. Let me see where I have it.
Perfect.
Yes. Well, actually, we have tons of journals on crime, so that's really amazing. So we have sort of the number one is the Tijdschrift voor Criminologie, so the Journal of Criminology. It's been there since '58, so that's my age. So that's 66 years. So, and I think it's still doing very well, publishing interesting things at a minimum budget. So really doing very well. And then we have, I think that you should take along in a way. We have the Journal on Culture and Criminology. That's a pretty recent one. And that's more the sort of cultural, anthropological area, part of criminology. And then we have one sort of associate. We have the Journal of Security, that's for veiligheid, on security and security care, etc. And it also reports on crime and other things. I think it is also well read, more maybe a little bit police journal, though we also have a police journal. We have Journal for Restorative Justice, that's for herstelrecht, which is, you could say associated. Then we have Forensic Journal, the Journal of Forensic Psychiatry and Psychology, which is, maybe not criminology per se, but definitely associated. And maybe the sort of most niche one is the one called Crimigration and Law, Crimigratie en Recht. So they say that they're a legal journal on the in the area of crimigration. This is where alien law and criminal law are applied interchangeably. Also a quite you could say critical group of people that do this. So this part I prepared really well.
Okay, great. And do you still also have does it still exist, the Delict and Delinquent?
Delict and Delinquent, but I think Delict is more legal, actually.
Legal.
Yeah, and not peer-reviewed, but you could mention that. And also we have Delict and Delinquent, and of course we also have the Journal for the Police. But so that's that's a little bit the problem with criminology, that you have these sort of adjacent. We also have like a legal sociology, but it's there's also a lot of private law and admin law that's being, but also there you find sometimes a criminological paper in essence. So, and also we have Mens en Maatschappij, so people and society, where also sometimes criminological things are published. So it is a little bit, it's not very well fenced off but these are, I would say, probably sort of the core ones, and the main publisher is Boom.
Yeah, and most of them still publish in Dutch. I mean, this is in Belgium, for example, there is one journal that's called Panopticon, but it's increasingly becoming difficult to get people to write in your native language, because you're not read. Language is just not spoken enough. I mean, everybody can read English, nobody reads Dutch. So we have the same problem, actually.
That's maybe one of the last things I'm going to say, because this is not unique to criminology, but also, in many departments, the working language is now English, because you have a lot of foreigners working there, which is fine. But, we have Dutch laws. We have policymakers who are Dutch. If you don't tell them in Dutch, if you tell them in English, they're not going to understand it, So, and I think it is not part of an internationalization tendency. I think it is part of a denationalization tendency of science. So, and it is also in some disciplines you do not get credit points for writing in Dutch. People will say, no, I'm not gonna. We wanted to collaborate with someone from econometrics here to look at the sort of how do you say that financial impact of crime victimization. And she said, are you going to publish in Dutch? Yeah, sorry, then I can't collaborate with you, because it doesn't give me anything. They have to publish in English. So, and I think, especially for a discipline like criminology, it is really important that a significant chunk of what you do is published in the local language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
have
a
enough
major
for me?
issue, but I remember being with your people at the NSCR when you were the head, and I'm still the head of the chair of this advisory group. I remember that not only they were not willing to publish in Dutch, but also they were not really willing to publish in European journals because the American journals will give them more quotations. So perhaps as now the open access policy is getting more and more common, and translating things is becoming much and more easier, that could be a way, that you publish in English and then you have a version in Dutch.
Yeah, and it also happens the other way, so that you publish in Dutch and then you rework it, you make it a little bit more international, and you submit it to an international journal, you get reviews, you change it again, and then you can publish it twice in a sense. But I think the other path would be the better one. First publish internationally and then publish nationally. But really, I mean, if you sit here in an institute or a department funded by Dutch tax money, using Dutch crime data, a phenomenon that is being combated by the Dutch government, and then you write only in US journals, then a really odd thing is going on. That shouldn't be the case.
Agree. Yeah.
I have to sign off, my dears.
But we want to thank you for a very interesting interview, and
okay, thank you for participating.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you for inviting me. I was very confused about it, but I hope I did well.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was perfect. Take care, Catrien.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Guyot. Your host are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Evi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.